the first foremost thing is, when to let the cat out of the bag, right? I think at the end of the day, should tell HR, their manager, whenever they feel ready. You benefit to announcing your pregnancy earlier than one might expect. And it's because once you tell your employer.
Hi, welcome back to the Be Her Village podcast. I'm your host, Kaitlin McGrias. Today, I am sharing with you part 2 of my conversation with Akiko from Maternity Leave 411. Akiko, in this conversation, goes deep into the actual tips you need to have a conversation with your company about taking maternity leave. She tells us when we should do it. She tells us the exact words we need to use and what words we should not use, and gives tips for what happens if your company disagrees with the maternity leave you think you deserve. This is a must listen. Let me know what you think. Text me, share it, send me an email, and please leave us a 5-star review and follow our podcast so you never miss an episode. Thanks so much for listening. Enjoy.
There's still a ways to go with our society with normalizing taking time away from work. I mean, I still hear from clients who've told me that their boss have said, "Well, what are you going to do on vacation for, during your maternity leave?" And so we still have a ways to go to normalize it, to not stigmatize it. But I am seeing I am seeing it less so, and we have to start somewhere. And I also think that, from, the more we talk about it from like a legislature perspective, providing a longer federal FMLA job protection, providing a federal paid leave law, that'll really help that stigma, and of course there's scenarios, unfortunate scenarios where you just have to go back to work, like, going back to federal paid leave, there isn't any federal
Mhm.
mandate to pay anyone while they're out on leave. If someone doesn't live in a state that has a paid leave program, if they do not have any PTO saved up, they might have to go back to work after, a very short time post birth, and so there are some instances where that's just, you can't do it, their hands are tied. But again, I'm hopeful that at some point there'll be some sort of legislature that helps not only give people time away, paid time away, but also that will help that stigma, that'll help normalize taking leave.
Absolutely. For both parents too,
For
because I
both.
know
Yeah.
as a doula, I always ask parents what
Mhm.
their leave situation is
Yeah.
like, mostly because it's like I was that person. By the way,
Yeah.
I've told this story so many times, but I was that person that we couldn't, for whatever reason, it was 14 years or 13 years ago now, but like we couldn't access the leave. The
Hmm.
details don't matter as much because the more I talk to people like you, Akiko, I'm like, should I have, was my HR person wrong? Probably. But either way, we didn't access the leave. I was left on my own. My husband was back to work while I was still in the hospital
Yeah.
with my first baby. And I
Okay.
was only in the hospital 2 nights. It wasn't like, and I had him on a Saturday morning. He went back to work Monday morning.
Oh,
So I always ask my doula clients because I want to make sure that they have the support lined
yeah.
up. And
Yeah.
so many times the dad will say, I get 12 weeks, but I'm probably going to take like 2 weeks down, maybe 2 weeks, like when her mother leaves or when she goes back or whatever. And it's like, oh, you're not even going to come close because there is an enormous amount of pressure and stigma. I talked to one dad who said that he benefited from a wonderful paid leave.
Hmm.
And then after his baby was born, they changed it and made the policy worse at his
Oh,
company,
geez.
which is just not the direction
Yeah.
that we need to be
No.
heading in. And that was within the past 4 years. So
Oh, gosh.
things are definitely tough in the parental leave
Yeah.
space
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
I would love if you could share with us some real actionable tips
Yeah.
for the conversations with HR because I know, I mean, it's easy to sort of talk about like leave laws and the importance and all of
Yeah.
this, but like how do you actually talk to an
Yeah.
HR rep or your boss if you don't have a company large enough to have an
Yeah.
HR rep? Like how do you actually do this? How do you both get like sort of the bravery that you need, but
Yeah.
also like
Yeah.
what kind of information do you
Yeah.
need? Talk to me like I've never worked in a company and walk me through how I should do this.
Sure. No, that's a great question. So, I think, the first foremost thing is, when to let the cat out of the bag, right? I think at the end of the day, an employee should tell HR, their manager, whenever they feel ready. Do not get pressure from others to announce your pregnancy. I will say, however, that there is a benefit to announcing your pregnancy earlier than one might expect. And it's because once you tell your employer that you are pregnant, you are in a protected class.
Hmm.
And they cannot there's anti-discrimination laws against, defending or protecting rather pregnant employees. And so once you tell them that you're pregnant, they can't treat you worse. They can't fire you just because you're pregnant. So really it's helpful to let them know you're pregnant. And then for instance, an example is like, if you had to go to uh, an OB, a medical appointment because of your pregnancy. And if you didn't tell your employer, you might be sneaky about it. Oh, I have to take, sick time, or I have to take PTO or whatever, And so if you tell them that you're pregnant, that time away from work for that medical appointment is protected time. So you can take that time without any sort of worry, right? And so that's an example where letting them know early is beneficial. Then after that, once you have your when you have your conversation, or kind of eh, before you have your conversation, rather, you should do your own research. You should do your research on the federal FMLA. Are you eligible? Do you live in a state that has statutory leave laws? Do you live in a state that has statutory paid leave programs? And so once you kind of do your due diligence, do your own research, then from there you should talk to HR. My recommendation always is do your research first, then talk to HR. I just think it just sets you up for success more.
Hmm.
That way, if there's conflicting information that you might have researched, then what HR is telling you, you can then resolve those conflicts. Maybe you're wrong, maybe HR is wrong, but nonetheless, if you had done your research first before speaking with HR, then it's a more productive conversation. And then once you tell HR that you're pregnant, typically they'll provide you with, leave documents, employer leave documents, for you to then further study. But I think that one of the more important details that I like to tell everyone is that when you formally tell HR that, that you want to take maternity leave, don't say the word maternity leave. I know my company itself is called Maternity Leave 411, but maternity leave is a colloquial term. It,
Hmm.
there's nothing in the laws that maternity leave is not a legal word. It's just something that we do, right? And so when you're formally requesting leave, use the actual entitlements, use the actual rights. So, if I'm requesting to take leave for my pregnancy disability under the federal FMLA starting on X date. And so that way, you're putting it out there that you are pregnant, you're putting it out there that you are taking leave under the federal FMLA. And then it's just going to make, I think it really kind of puts you in the driver's seat as well. And
Mm.
so, when you just say, I want to take maternity leave, an employer might say, well, we don't have maternity leave. Well, you do, but what that employee meant to say was, I want to take leave under the federal FMLA. So really using those actual terms is really important.
That's amazing advice. And I think that's so important about just getting someone into that driver's seat, number one, but also putting everyone immediately on the same page as to what we
Yeah,
are discussing.
yeah, yeah.
There is something that gives the indication to the person receiving the email what to go research, what to go look up, what you're referring to, so that the conversation can be had with both parties understanding that.
Exactly.
That's very powerful.
Yeah. And I think that in this, just put, and I do think that it goes a long way. Putting yourself kind of in charge of that conversation in that driver's seat is really empowering, you know? And at the end of the day, you know, you want to fight for your rights. You want to fight for that leave that you are entitled to. And
Right.
so by doing the due diligence, by doing your research, and there are leave consultants that people can work with, but by doing that research, what you're able to do is when you then eventually have that conversation with HR, you're able to tell the HR, this is what I am entitled to versus what am I entitled to, right?
Mm,
Because if the question is, what am I entitled to? An HR person that doesn't know the laws could tell you wrong information, right? And so just really kind of, you know, empowering yourself is really is going to go, I think, a long way.
that's wonderful. So here's a question, and it stems from your personal experience, but also I'm wondering how you advise clients on this. What happens when you do that, right? When you go in saying under FMLA or under California law or whatever state or company policy XYZ, this is what I'm imagining is, you know,
Yeah.
this is what I would like to access.
Mhm.
What happens when someone who even does those correct steps and
Yeah.
really activates their power and is very specific, what happens when there's resistance? What happens when there's resistance that's based on nothing but being resistant? What happens when there's resistance
Yeah.
that's based on misunderstanding of laws? Like how
Yeah.
what do we do next? Because as much as I get fired up by like, let's fight for maternity
Yeah.
leave, part of me is also like, we shouldn't have to fight
Right.
when we're in this. And I would imagine people are listening to this and thinking, oh man, I don't want to fight, because in my line of work, with doula work, we're doing the same thing. It's like we're going to go in and we're going to help you do all this work and we're going to be clear in communication and we're going to get your entire birthing team or
Yeah.
postpartum team on board. And it's like all of this work is done to reduce that conflict because
Yeah.
nobody really wants
Want it.
conflict.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what obviously you're taking a lot of steps ahead of time, but like what happens when you do all this work and you work with a client and then they're like, great, I did everything you said, they're still not acquiescing.
Sure. Sure. You know, there's many employers who will push and fight, even though they are clearly wrong.
Wow.
I will toot my own horn to say that my success rate is very high. What I typically do specifically for my work is I will draft emails, you know, for my client where it specifically sources the actual law. So there really isn't room for any doubt. I will create a very well structured email that really outlines the leave laws that someone is entitled to. And then after that, if there is resistance, I think the best thing that I think the best thing that an employer can do, or maybe even an employee can ask the employer to do, is ask them, well, my understanding is correct. Can you maybe, give this to our legal department and have them take a look at it? And I
Mm,
love when that happens, actually. I've had clients that say, like, oh my gosh, my HR said, oh, well, legal's going to look at it. I'm like, well, let them, because clearly someone, the legal department's probably going to will know more than the HR person. So let them do it, and don't be afraid of that, know, as long, if you know that your information is correct, and of course that takes, research, perhaps working with an expert. But if you know that, have confidence in that and kind of push forward. And then
mm,
of course, the worst case scenario where the HR is like, hands up, sorry, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm not even going to look at, even I'm not going to even entertain doing my own research. Then at that point, you should seek legal counsel,
mm,
and speak to an attorney. Because at the end of the day, if an employer is violating your leave rights, that's a huge no-no, and at the end, the employer is going to be in a more world of pain having done that than having done maybe the research to figure out if they're wrong or right. And
right.
so, I do think that there are steps that someone can take before getting an attorney, but of course, if an employer is just digging their heels and they're just completely dismissive of entertaining that they might be wrong, then yeah, you should seek legal counsel. And
Yeah.
look at your, see your community, see if there is organizations like I was able to go to, the Legal
Mm.
Aid Society, and get feedback from them. A lot of times, if it's a free, legal clinic, they're great. Look at those resources. Another thing that, I think a lot of employment attorneys, they might work, on like a situation where you don't have to really pay them unless you go to court and you win, right? I
Mhm.
forget what that structure is called, but oftentimes, and you might want to do a little bit of research. I'm not an expert on this, on like the business side of the entity of employment attorneys, but there are ways where you can seek legal counsel without having to pay up front. And so, because I think a lot of times people might say, well, I don't want to see an attorney because it's just going to be too expensive. So there might be workaround. There might be options available to you that you aren't aware of.
Yeah. But also, that is absolutely the worst, worst, worst
Yeah,
case. And I appreciate you going all the way there, right? I
yeah,
mean, I think that was definitely my question, but it sounds like when you do the work ahead of time, all of this is actually to avoid that conflict.
yeah,
It's to
yeah.
avoid where the communication breaks down. And so that's where you're presenting. I mean, it's pretty hard to argue with like, hey, here's the law, here's the link to the law, here's the highlighted law, and
Exactly.
here are the dates I'm taking, you know.
Exactly.
That sounds that sounds actually
Yeah,
it sounds straightforward and relaxing in
yeah.
the way that like you talking about all of the overlapping laws and state and federal and this and that. It's like that felt like my head was buzzing. And when you
Mhm.
say you just lay it out in an email, man, that sounds easy and
Mhm.
powerful that
Yeah,
you get to dictate
yeah,
your leave and what
yeah.
that looks like. And you're not asking for it, which
Right.
that's, I mean, it's such a slight shift, but like it's a big shift to go
Hmm.
from, hey, I just want to let you know this is what I'm doing
Yeah.
and let me know if there's any next steps
Right.
versus, can you please help me? You know,
Yeah.
like it's like a victim
Yeah.
it's a
Totally.
victim mentality. And I do believe the system, I bristle at the word disability when it comes to maternity leave coverage. It is what it is, and I know it's
Yeah.
like not maybe like the thing we have to tackle, but there is this like victim
Hmm.
helplessness feeling
Hmm.
that we attribute to this
Sure.
incredibly powerful time. And I love that change of coming to the table with your research done, knowing what you want, knowing what to ask for, and asking for their assistance in executing on it, not asking in their assistance for figuring
Yeah.
out what you actually get.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's just so important, you can only, you have to look out for yourself,
Well,
and
that's the thing, right? And it's like this is like similar in the medical system. It's the same thing with your employer. And honestly, with everything, there are so many layers of incentives.
yeah.
And the only person that will ever look out for you and your baby is you and your baby and you for your baby, right? It is the very first step almost in advocating for yourself, which is a bigger part of motherhood and parenthood, I think, than people realize.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
this like mother bear, the
Yeah.
mother bear, right? Like that that symbolism. Um,
Totally.
my brother actually like just had an encounter. He lives in an area in New Jersey with a lot of bears, and he's like, I had an encounter on a golf course last week where a mother bear, he goes, the way that she looked at me actually terrified me. And he's like a really big guy. He's like six
Yeah.
five, but he's like, I go, yeah, it's that mama bear. And I feel like part of this is mama bear doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it does, but also it starts in pregnancy. For some of us, it starts on our fertility journey. We have
Yeah.
to learn how to advocate and find information. And the maternity leave process, parental leave, short-term disability leave is all, I want to be very specific now. I feel empowered to use correct language. Maternity leave is made up. That's a
Yeah.
made up term. That feels sort of mind-blowing and it makes me
Hmm.
feel like, oh, I need to be more mindful of that as well. It's also not inclusive, right? I think parental leave is a much
Right.
wider, I speak primarily to mothers as well.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
very because let's be real, that's who's making the phone calls and making sure
Yeah.
the ducks are in a row most of the time.
That is true. That is true.
But yeah, this is very cool, very powerful shift in the language.
Yeah.
Akiko, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about what it's like to work with you and how people could find you if they're interested in having you help them.
Yeah, people can find me on my website, maternityleave411.com, on Instagram at maternityleave411. And then there's that little button that helps, that can connect me via email. But my kind of bread and butter is in California, but I will also support non-California employees as well. So don't feel discouraged if you're not from California. Please feel free to reach out. But typically the process is I will start by sending you a questionnaire, and that questionnaire will help me understand what your leave rights are, what your eligibility is from a leave law perspective. And then you'll also at that point send me any leave materials that your employer has provided. Many employers might have their own policy. And so I'll review all of that with a fine-tooth comb to kind of put all the pieces together. Again, how long your job is protected, how the leave laws work in conjunction with your employer's leave policy, as well as how you'll be paid. If you live in a state that has a statutory benefit, how your employer's paid leave policy, how that might all kind of work together. And so I'll review all of that information with a fine tooth comb, and then distill it into a timeline as well as a document that you can then refer back to throughout the course of your maternity leave. But with my service, what I like to do is it's all inclusive. I am here for the employee literally until they go back to work, because leave is not stagnant. Once you start your leave, things can change. If you have your baby early or late, if you have a vaginal birth versus C-section delivery, if you have post-birth complications, all of those details will change your timeline. And so that's why I don't like to have it be a one-time conversation and it be done. Things change. And so that's why I like to be with you, be with the moms, be with the parents all the way until they go back to work. And so, yeah, it's a journey, and it's, I once had a, I once had a client that she had sent me her baby announcement, and she had said, you should do a wall with all of the babies that you helped deliver. And obviously, I don't want to, I clearly did not deliver said baby. I don't want to, take that. But it was a special moment in the sense that, like, I'm glad it was just so, it was a blessing to hear, that I was part of that journey that helped,
Mm.
that might have alleviated any sort of anxiety or stress or worry. And so yeah, I'm kind of your ongoing support person for anything leave related.
You're a maternity leave doula, and it's wonderful.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for
Sure.
today, for joining me, for sharing your wisdom, for turning your difficult moment of stress in your life and the learnings from that into something that helps so many other people. I'm really grateful that
Thank
our
you.
paths have crossed, and I really enjoyed
Yeah.
having this conversation with you.
Thank you. Likewise.
Akiko is full of incredible information. And if you listen to part one, which we published last week, this information that Akiko has about navigating the maternity leave landscape is from her own experience. It's because she was sitting there on maternity leave, holding her baby, getting told by her HR she needed to come back 8 weeks before she actually needed to come back. And she ended up having to draft a whole letter, research the law, and explain to her HR rep what maternity leave she was actually due. And now she helps people just like you figure out what federal coverage, state coverage, company coverage, and otherwise you might have accessible to you. And of course, the Be Her Village gift registry, which can help you get funds for your maternity leave so you can have a longer paid maternity leave and stay home with your baby, recovering, resting, and enjoying your brand new family. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to go to behervillage.com to check out our gift registry options and subscribe to our podcast. Every time you subscribe, every time you leave us a review, it helps more parents just like you get this information. And that is ultimately what we're here for. We want the information about how to get the most coverage possible to get out to the most amount of people. So thank you so much for your support. It's really easy to do, and it means a lot to all of us.